All right, welcome back, everybody. Today, I'm joined by head coach Lamont Paris of the Chattanooga Mocs men's basketball team. Coach Paris became head coach of the Mocs back in 2017 after 7 seasons up in Wisconsin with the Badgers, where he made multiple Sweet 16 appearances and multiple Final Four appearances. Coach, thank you for being with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ian. Glad to be here, and always like talking shop and a little basketball. It's a fun time of the year, busy time of the year, but transitioning from, coaching to the other stuff that comes next is always uh, uh, an item for me to try to deal with. But I'm on to the next thing, and we're ready to go. So.
Yes, sir. So we can just go ahead and jump straight in. Obviously, we're a year into the COVID-19 pandemic. So, I mean, if you can remember when the pandemic first hit, what was the very first adjustment that you made as a coach?
Yeah, the very first thing, I guess, was just, it was kind of cease and desist on everything that we were doing. So it just was maintaining contact with our guys. You go from seeing them every day, really to we had guys, everyone had left campus and didn't return for a long time. So it just was, the first thing that changed was just reestablishing a connection and communication with the guys via Zoom, and doing that on a regular basis. So yeah, that was the first thing. But then it was just constantly waiting to see what the next thing that we were going to be able to do was, and learning more and more about the virus itself. Transmission of the virus. I remember when I used to go to the grocery store, and I'd wipe down everything item that I bought when I came back from the grocery store. I mean, that's what we thought it was at that point. And so we've learned more, but yeah, just constantly learning more about it, and then just disseminating that information to our guys, and constantly being in contact with them. That was a big change from just how we were doing things on a face-to-face everyday basis normally.
So obviously during the summer, you're still focusing on how you can prepare for the upcoming season. But what were some ways that players that may have been in high school were kind of getting themselves on your radar during quarantine over the summer?
Yeah, it was interesting for us because we didn't have any incoming freshmen this past season. And so we weren't doing a lot with high school guys, to be honest with you. Some, we were doing a little. We had gotten a chance to see just a couple guys. We had only offered, I think, maybe 2 or 3 high school rising seniors at the time. And, once we were out of contention for their services, we made a decision not really to do as much with the high school guys, just because we weren't going to be able to see them. You were going to have limited access and information to what they were capable of doing as players and who they were as people, and that was going to be harder to track all that information down. So it changed the whole landscape of the high school recruiting scene tremendously for most places, but certainly it did for us. So we were, even to this day, we just haven't done a ton with that 2021 senior class, who I feel bad for, just because I think that's a national trend, is that outside the top 150 kids, I just don't think they're getting near as much of attention as they normally would be, or as they would deserve, just because the influx of the number of transfers.
What are some ways that players can get on coaches' radars under normal circumstances? Is it an email, a phone call? Should they just send you game tape directly? What do you think they should be doing?
I mean, it can be that. I mean, we ended up taking in my in my first year here at Chattanooga, we ended up signing a young man who we only learned about. Now, we got the job, it was late, it was in April, you all this stuff is going on. We ended up signing a young man who I learned about via email. His mom had emailed me something, and I was going through every single email that I got from a prospect, and reading it, or looking at YouTube clips that they can attach right to it. That makes it pretty easy. Long gone are the days where you had to, put a CD into a thing or plug something into your computer. You click on a link and you're watching in seconds. So that's a good thing. But to be honest with you today, kids play so much. There are so many ways to see a young man play that, you normally, and there's so many outlets. It's just, there aren't that many guys that fall completely through the cracks. That it just doesn't happen quite as much. And there'll still be some surprises if a young man, doesn't look like he's a great prospect, and then he surprises some people. You look at Ohio University, and I'll give a lot of credit to I know the staff that brought this young man to Ohio University. It was the previous staff there, and they took a young man who scored, I think it was 52 points in his total senior year. The only time he started was on senior night, and they took this guy, and so sometimes that happens. This guy's going to get drafted potentially, and so sometimes that happens. It's fewer and far between, I think, just with the landscape of recruiting and the access that people have to seeing kids play with YouTube or any of the outlets that they have in order to see kids play.
So just to kind of pivot for a second, you were talking about how so many players are playing so many different ways, whether it's AAU or it's high school ball, things like that. Do you value as a coach all game tape equally, or do you prefer to watch maybe a player's AAU tape over their high school tape, or vice versa?
Yeah, when I'm doing, I think in it, a face-to-face evaluation is always going to give you the best opportunity to size up a guy. What does he really look like? How thick or strong is he? How quickly does he move and respond to things? What's he doing? And I think the in-person evaluation is always going to be your most accurate. But as it on tape, or even in person, I like watching. I like having some diversification in what I do, as far as a guy may play a different role on his high school team than he does on his AAU team. And oftentimes they do. They're coached differently. I've seen guys perform better on one or the other. It's kind of like I worked in admissions a long time ago, and some kids performed better on the ACT. Some kids performed better on the SAT. There was no real rhyme or reason to it, but that just was. And some kids play and feel more comfortable with their high school. They have guys maybe that they grew up with and they've played with them forever. Some kids play better on their AAU team because they're able to just let cut loose, or they're playing with a higher level player on their team than what they did. So passes that they can throw at the rim and guys catch and dunk them, they couldn't do that in high school because they didn't have personnel that would do that. So you wouldn't know that guy can do that. So I think it's a combination. I think they're both value. They both have merit. I think the value of AAU has gone up in my estimation because there's better coaching in AAU. It used to be literally 15 years ago, roll them out and those guys just play. Now I think you see some role definition even in the AAU scene and circuit. I've seen some good coaching, some good sets and plays, and it's with the EYBL and some of these high level tournaments, they're so competitive that I think they're getting more out of the coaching aspect of what's happening on the AAU side. So I value that a little bit more than what I did before, but I think there's merit to both of them.
When you travel and see players play, what are the top 3 things that you look for that lets you know that they're a good fit for your program? I know some coaches talk about, body language in between plays, how vocal they are, their actual, production on the floor. What do you look for?
Yeah, I look, if you're watching a young man, then you're probably pretty sure that he has some level of ability that fits into what you want, right? So you may be evaluating just how well he shoots it. I know he shoots it well. How well does he shoot it? Am I going to be offering him or not based on that? But when you're talking about those things as far as a fit for your program, I spend a lot of time watching the interaction between a young man and his teammates, how he responds to a bad call from the officials, how he responds to his coach who pulls him out for doing something poorly, how he cheers for his teammates when he's not on the floor, or does he not? I think that's an important thing. I do that with our guys. Even when I watch our games, I'll watch it another time over. I watch the games a ton. I'll watch it another time over and look just at the sidelines on our team and see what guys are doing and how into the game are they? How excited are they for their, or are they really just about themselves and frustrated that they're not really out there helping the team? So those are some of the biggest things. Yeah, body language, all that stuff is really important. But I think for me, character is the biggest part of it. So you look at some things that really evaluate, how do they respond to their parents who might bring a drink over? Like, it's a real thing. I've honestly seen a kid come out of an AAU game. His mom comes down with a purple Gatorade, and he like snatches it and flings and waves her out of there away. And I'm like, I don't know, like, that's not the response I would have guessed was going to happen. So it's just a variety of things that you're going to evaluate just in terms of how a guy acts and how he's going to impact your locker room.
We often hear coaches speak about a player being coachable. How do you gauge that when you're not necessarily working with a prospect day in and day out?
Yeah. There's two sides of coachability to me. One is, are they coachable in that you give them information, they can process that information, and then it translates to a change in what they're doing on the court, right? That's coachability, the ability to be coached. Then there's coachability, the willingness to be coached, and that's the more important one, I think, to be honest with you, because that's just a decision that a person makes, and that's also the easier one to evaluate externally. I think the other one, you can only really get a view if you're coaching that person. Externally, I can see that when a coach pulls a guy over to the side to give him some instruction, that he's locked into it, he's okay with it, he's not interested in it. I can't evaluate that, but I can't evaluate the ability, the actual ability of processing information, translating that ultimately into a different action on the floor. So that part's hard, but the other one is. But I think they're both important.
As a coach, when you have that first conversation with the prospect, what are you looking for that lets you know, they're a good fit for your program?
It's hard. I'd like them to be engaging, but this is 2021 and people are different now when they're in their teens, and it's not that doesn't always happen, but you stand out. But so I look for, if a guy's engaging and has stuff to add, I try not to dominate the conversation with a recruit, and I want to hear them talk about anything. It could be about what they like to eat and really describing what it is or what they're passionate about in life, what their favorite television show is, how excited they are about whatever it is. I like them to be engaged in what we're doing, and I hear how they communicate, and that gives me, it's uncommon, but that's who we're looking for also. Like I like people that at least know how to communicate at some level, and are obviously willing to communicate at some level. So that's an important part of it.
Speaking of talking for a little bit, you also, of course, speak to high school coaches. Have you ever run into a scenario where you had a very talented player who was not spoken of very highly by his coaches, and how do you respond to those situations?
I mean, I have not as much here, but at other stops along my path, I had, particularly like at Wisconsin, you're looking for a specific type of guy. And since we're talking recruiting, that as an assistant, that's really when you're dug into the recruiting process. And so you're trying to find a player that fits your style, fits the head coach's coaching style. And so, there have been plenty of times where they tell you something that's concerning, or, you know, I don't often hear, coach, he's no good. I mean, he's not you just don't want to take him. He's not good. I don't hear that very often. If I do hear that from a high school coach, I've already heard that normally before I get to that conversation. But yeah, by the time you get there, I have heard some concerning things at times. And so you got to get to the bottom of those things and see if those are real, or, you know, ask some tough questions to a young man or his family as to why this happened, or is there any validity to this, or, but yeah, sometimes you do, but most times high school coaches also want to see their players do really well. So they're going to tell you what, you know, they're going to tell you they're better at shooting the ball than what they are. They're going to tell you, typically they're going to tell you what they need to tell you to help the young man usually.
When you bring a player in for an official visit, as a host, what is the most important thing that you want them to leave with at the end of that visit?
Yeah, typically just on our visits, we're really laid back. They're low pressure. I just want them to get to know who I am as a person and who our staff is as people and our players. I think that's the number one thing, is just providing a comfortable environment to, you know, and then you still do this. You go and meet with the head of the business department, and then you go and have this and you do that, and all these things you're supposed to do, right? And you know, to me, those are so far down on the list. Not that the decision, the business school is not an important factor in their decision-making process, but just to me, it's going to come down to, can they see themselves being coached by me? Can they see themselves being in a locker room with these other players? And you know, if they can, you're going to have a great chance to get, you know, in this profession, the vast majority of times decisions aren't made by the time you get to a visit. You already have done enough research on whatever academic area of interest you've done a lot of that. So you're getting there, you're trying to figure out, hey, how do I fit? How do I feel about this? And how do I interact with the people that I'm going to be around for the next, you know, how many ever years it might be.
I want to take a step back just for a second, because you mentioned Ohio University and how they recruited a young man who had 52 total points his senior year, only started on senior night, but you said now he might have a chance to play professionally. So as a mid-major coach yourself, how do you go about finding those diamond in the rough players who may be getting overlooked, but who really just need a chance?
Yeah, you know, I think it's very difficult. I think it's very difficult, you know. That's why they're called diamonds in the rough. I mean, it's difficult today because guys have so many opportunities to play. You know, before AAU, or even when AAU first started, you know, in the early '90s, I was in Ohio. If you played AAU, you were that was reserved only for Division I players and usually high level Division I players. And now but you know, in the state of Ohio, for example, where I grew up, it's the seventh largest. It may have fluctuated a little bit, but it was the seventh largest state in the country by populace. But yet it only had 3 AAU programs. Well, now you can go to Madison, Wisconsin, probably has 4 different AAU programs just in that one city, as opposed to 3 in the whole state of Ohio. So there's so many opportunities for these kids that, you know, you pretty much know who can play, I've seen a guy play 14 times over, like, you know, there used to be some guys that just no one knew about, you know, and there are plenty of stories about those guys that no one knew about. I just don't think there are as many guys that you don't know about today. And I think there might be some misevaluations here and there. There might be a young man that grows 4 inches over the next couple of years, and that's why he was under the radar, so to speak. But there's a lot of opportunity for these guys to be seen, and so it's usually not for lack of visibility or opportunity to play in front of someone, usually.
So obviously you spent a significant amount of time at Wisconsin as an assistant coach, and now as a head coach with your own coaching staff. How do you all handle recruiting players in different regions of the United States? I know you all have some players from Florida, some transfer players over the last couple of years, some guys from Ohio. How do you handle those situations?
Yeah, we have international kids. We've got players from all over the place, and so I think the landscape of recruiting is changing so much that it's not just the geography is becoming a smaller factor in the decisions of prospects, particularly the transfers. I think once they've made a decision to leave, the most important thing for them is that they get it right. And if they can get it right and then the geography works for them also, great. But they want to get it right above all else. And so the geography oftentimes is not quite as big of a factor for them. So I think you can spread your net out a little bit further when you're dealing with transfers. And then just, I think in general today, I think it's something kids are used to playing in AAU and traveling. Kids go to prep school way more now than they used to. And so those kids have been away from home already. So I think you're able to cast a wider net now than you were probably even 10 years ago, particularly for a school that's at the mid-major level. At the high major level, I think you've always been able to find your niche with certain guys. But at the mid-major level, I think you can do it. But we have, I think it's just a people business at the end of the day. And so whether you're from California, Florida, New York, or Texas, I think if you relate with people, and that's what I alluded to earlier when they come on official visits, I think it's the most important thing. If you relate to people in a positive way and they feel a strong connection, I think you're gonna have a good chance to have those kids, decide to choose your university and your program.
You've also had some pretty impressive homers in your time coaching as well. Sam Decker, Bronson Koenig, both Wisconsin natives, and now you have Jamal Walker, Ashton Smith, Grant Ledford, all Tennessee guys. Do you find it a little bit easier to recruit within your state, or is it about the same as recruiting out of state?
Yeah, in state, I think it's always going to be. I think brand recognition is the first thing, and so I think the chances of that being high are greater when you talk with kids that are local and are more familiar with the university in general, and what it has to offer, and can think back and say, I had two friends that went there, or my mom's an alum, or I think you're always going to have the upper hand. Sam Decker was those two guys that you mentioned were great examples. Bronson Koenig grew up as a North Carolina fan, and it was kind of always his dream to go there. But he also, trust me, he was a Badger fan, and like that meant a lot to him to be able to play in front of his family and in the home state. So that was the deal. Sam Decker, but I think by the time the offer came out of Coach Ryan's mouth, it was already accepted. Sam had always wanted to be a Badger, and so that's definitely helpful with a lot of those kids. But as your brand grows, and if you can get it out there to some people from other areas, I think you can cast a broader net. But I think there's a distinct advantage if you're the home. All things considered equal, if you're the home state school or home city town school, I think you have a distinct advantage.
I want to switch gears a little bit. I know obviously you have a pretty long coaching resume, playing career as well. At any level, as a player or a coach, what is your best road trip memory that you can think of?
The best road trip memory. There have been so many things. I don't know. I mean, anytime you can win a championship on the road. I mean, I was at the College of Worcester my junior year. We finished the year 26-3, and we went to Wittenberg, which was our arch rivals, and we won the conference. And I think the conference tournament might have been there too. Anyway, I think that's what it was, a conference tournament. But anyway, we won it there, and that was a huge, we were making phone calls back in there were no cell phones back then. So stop at a payphone and we got to eat, and we were making phone calls with all our friends when we got back that we were going to celebrate. And, you know, that was a great one. There've been plenty of them. I mean, if, you know, Madison Square Garden, we played at Madison Square Garden. That was a memorable trip. If you count that as a road game, it wasn't a true road game, but I don't know. It's hard to, I mean, there are 100. I mean, there are 100. I don't want to bore you with all of them, but some would be more significant in the eyes of others than some of the other ones. But yeah, there've been a number of them, a ton of them.
And then last but not least, I was talking with Mr. Horton a little bit before you came in, and he was telling me about Coach Young, who's at Virginia Tech now. He was the Wofford coach a few years ago, how he would sit on the sidelines and eat popcorn before the games. I'm wondering, what is your pregame routine? Is there a certain song you listen to? Maybe you have a little snack. What do you do before a game?
Yeah. I mean, end up drinking a Diet Coke before every single game. Coca-Cola, if they ever wanted they need an endorsement from me. They're getting one already with I'm not getting paid for it, but yeah. So Diet Coke, before every game, as I sit down and get my final thoughts together on, you know, that's the moment when I decide what I want to start the game off with, as far as what play I want to start the game off with. So as I'm collecting those last thoughts and putting that together, then I usually do it to an ice cold. It's got to be ice cold. It's got to come right out of the cooler, an ice cold Diet Coke, and that's what helps me get my thoughts together.
Amazing. Well, Coach, thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate your insight and your story about your championship game back in college. Thank you once again. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Thanks for having me. If I can ever help you, let me know.
Yes, sir. Thank you.